Hey, LinkedIn friends. I am super excited for our March installment of our LinkedIn Live series, Biz Therapy. Again, I'm Stacey Sussman with Rev Up Advisory. We have an incredible guest, Hector, here, who's going to introduce himself in a minute. But I want to remind everybody about what the topic is today, because I think this is a really important one, and we appreciate Hector being on to talk so openly about this. The topic is the unspoken 90%, embracing the raw truths of startup failures. In a world where only a tenth of startups thrive, the stories of the 90% often go untold. So this March, we're going to talk about the unfiltered narrative of Hector's story, some tough decisions he had to make with his startup, but we're also going to go into valuable learning lessons and sort of what he's doing now and how he'd do everything differently. So Hector, welcome to the show. A pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Stacey. So my name's Hector. I currently work as my day job at a company called Lunio as a sales director. And then in my spare time, I work on a business influencer marketplace called Fluencer. And I also run a investment community called Revenue Syndicate, where we fund early stage startups. And Stacey and I met through talking about the previous startup that unfortunately is no longer with us. Excited to dig into it and share a couple of hard truths.
Awesome. Super appreciative for you being here. I know we got a really good commentary. I got some really awesome DMs on LinkedIn. Everyone hears about the big, shiny success stories. And as Hector and I know, working in scale up environments, it takes a lot of grit and tenacity to get there. So I'm going to throw the question up here on the stage and just talk to me about what the startup did. Give me some backstory and, anything you want to share about what it did. And then we're going to go into the nitty gritty of some lessons and some goals.
Yeah, sure. So I think the place to start is I was originally Cognism's first sales employee and then scaled to about 15 million ARR, trained a number of AEs and reps, and stumbled across the problem of data hygiene and updating the CRM. So the company was called...
Still a problem, Hector. Still a problem.
Yeah. So the company was called Comtura, which was an anagram of Auto CRM, which I thought was very clever, and investors seemed to like it. And I would say, I read a lot of Y Combinator content and, Lean Startup and all the other things that young fledgling entrepreneurs digest. And so I interviewed a bunch of people, wrote notes down, validated the problem as much as I could, and put it in a pitch deck and thought, God, people are going to love this. I can use transcripts to automatically update CRMs, better notes, better deal hygiene for sales managers. Everyone's going to want this. And that was the backstory and the start of it, really.
So I'll just point out a few things. You knew that there was a need in the market for this because you were obviously sort of doing it today. And I'm assuming you're seeing repeated patterns with customers or with clients that this just hasn't been solved at the end of the day. And so I think as I mentor early stage startups here in the US, I always find that they think there's a problem, but I'm not sure they actually validated the problem with customers or potential clients. So just talk me through that validation process, because honestly, I've seen some really bad ideas at the end of the day because they haven't gone through what I would say 100 plus customer interviews to really validate that there's a problem that they're trying to solve.
Yeah, so I now recommend to every founder I meet that they read a book called The Mum Test by Robert Fitzpatrick, which basically teaches you the frameworks of how to validate a startup idea. The kind of different phases that we went through. So we believed we had two ICPs. So the first was the end users, the account executives actually using it to update Medic or Spice to whatever framework they had in their Salesforce or HubSpot. And then the second is the sales manager to keep them happy so that, their notes were being done on time, they were being done up to a particular standard. And it's also worth highlighting during this process, I was very fortunate enough to have a pretty good network. And so I could get quite a lot of product feedback. And this is actually how I built my pitch deck to illustrate, one of the things we always get asked is, who's got traction, what companies you've been working with, who is your design partner to go through and build this. And so I believed I'd collated enough of that information to give a powerful enough narrative that I could convince investors to invest in me. And this is bearing in mind pre-product. I had two technical co-founders, and we put together an initial machine learning model, which I'll talk at a high level how it worked, because it will make sense why this part of the reason why the startup failed as well a bit later on.
Yes, and I think you're being modest. Hector has an incredible network. He is based over in Europe. If you hear an accent, folks, that's what you got there. But I would say you have a huge network. And so when I'm mentoring some startups, I always say you need to get to 100 people. Obviously, you can build and scale before the 100, but that's sort of my personal benchmark of voice of customer. Have you actually validated the problem? Do people want to buy it? And I get emails personally all the time that's like, can you speak with this founder that's got an early stage idea? Because I've also seen products that founders are building, but there's people that dominate the market in those products or in that space, and they have no idea that those companies exist. And to me, it's just you didn't do your homework at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's definitely a really interesting point that I think a lot of founders I speak to see too many successful companies in fundraising rounds and forget that it's probably 0.3% that get an acquisition all the way through to an exit or IPO. If you take a cohort of 10,000 startups, only 1,000 of those 10,000 get funding. And there's also a couple of, let's say, rules of thumb, which is, one is always make sure you have 3 months worth of personal runway if you do decide to go and build something and go and decide you want to put an MVP together. Then the other thing is, I now tell everyone, don't write a single line of code before you've got people who say, yes, this is absolutely something I want. Here is like a letter of intent, whether that's a document or you have 30 design partners. Okay, you might not convert all 30, but you have at least a very good chance that a large number of them will be your first customer base. And so there are a lot of things that you can prepare yourself with before you make the mistakes that I did, essentially.
No, I think some people don't know. I would love for you to drop the link of the book in the comments, if you can, or we'll put them in the show notes, because I think that's so important. I find with early stage folks, they rush to the end, which is revenue, and we want to generate revenue so we can scale further. But as you and I know, and I do this day in and day out, you got to put sort of the house together, and there's so many pieces of what that looks like in order to get rolling. And I know pre-COVID, investors were probably more ready to write checks and cut checks with all of those pieces not put together. But I know post COVID and what we're dealing with in 2023 and 2024, that scrutiny is at an entirely different stage. Even my folks that were early stage and had, let's say, a list of 50 criteria you need to meet, I've seen those lists and they've upped the ante on all those criteria of what they want.
Exactly. So we raised basically let's call it the peak of the SaaS golden era, where you could go out and ask for pretty substantial amounts of money. Obviously, the UK is very different from the US. We're conservative, let's say, by nature, but in comparison to the cohorts of other startups funded in the same year as us, we were in the top 10%. So we raised at a 3.5 million valuation, let's say $5 million valuation, about $500,000 for a pre-seed round, from 12 slides on a pitch deck and some pretty spaghetti code, I would say, to illustrate what we were trying to do.
Awesome. So talk to me about how it was two other co-founders, so a 3-founder leadership team. I know you had sort of people working behind the scenes. So just talk to me about where it started from a team perspective and where it went. And you can talk about it at sort of a high level.
Sure. So the product itself was actually deeply technical. So I required a specialist in data engineering, so natural language processing, machine learning, and statistics. And so I worked with a great co-founder who I really rate called Chris Swart. And then I also needed someone to actually build the interface, the programming, the actual web app as well. So another fantastic CTO called Santiago Barbat, who was one of the best developers I've ever worked with. And it's really interesting when you have, let's say, one commercial operations, myself, and then two technical, because they were so invested in what we were doing. They basically were learning how to do sales as well, especially when we got into, let's call it, the dog days. Things were not going well. They were like, well, there's no point, doing any more coding because we need to win customers. Otherwise we're going to bleed out, essentially. And originally, when we started the process, this is another mistake that I made, was hired too quickly. So I hired a SDR to help me. So I was booking meetings, but I wasn't closing. So I assumed it was the volume of the meetings and not the product that we were delivering.
So
Or
important. I just have to
yeah,
pause. So important.
yeah. And so really lovely SDR, very took a massive pay cut because he believed in what we were doing, and he was actually also a friend of mine I went to university with, and I think that made the experience much more difficult because I know what he'd given up to participate in it. And then I remember Christmas of 2022, I had to ask him to leave, and it was through no fault of his own. I was like, I'm burning cash. I can't even sell the product myself, and you're basically an expenditure, and so you've got to make those really tough decisions, and it's really it's so much worse when it's a friend of yours, basically. I think the other thing that I did was I hired this head of growth, and he stayed. I don't know. I should have fired him by the second week, and I let him stay there for 6 months. And so now I understand when people say hire unreasonably slow, fire exceptionally fast, purely
Yeah.
because the you can't, especially when you raise like $500,000. Okay, that's between three people. That's fine. That's nearly 18 months runway, which for most startups is fine. When you start adding even a headcount of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it starts getting pretty bad very quickly, especially if you're so developer and tech heavy, which we were. So we ended up expanding to 2 sales, 1 marketing, and then 4 developers, 1 product manager. And we were so tech heavy because it was, again, a really difficult product to build. And we were having the conversations with prospects, but no one was biting the bullet. And I feel like we could have avoided that if we hadn't committed so much to this single idea of automatically updating a CRM. And the objections were things which you would expect, like I'm nervous about transcription quality. Like integrations actually take a really long time to build. If you're building a Salesforce integration, every Salesforce is unique. It has different custom objects. Not every field is named the same. So when you look at the API, it's massive. So that took a while. And then I made tons of errors. Like one was, okay, well, I spoke to this guy who uses HubSpot, so we should go build a HubSpot integration. And I've got 10 people who said they've used HubSpot. So then we go and build that. And then I can't close the HubSpot ones. Then I think, oh, okay, it's because we're missing this key feature, and then get so distracted. And especially when you're the sole, let's say you're the voice of the customer to the rest of your team, because you're the only one who's cold calling and engaging, sitting on demos in those meetings, it's very important to distill information, and the weight of your words is exceedingly important, because if you don't relay that correctly, you can, one, piss away a ton of money, and two, upset your team, right? If they've just spent 3 months building something and then no one's using it, like developers, like salespeople, we get our kicks out of signatures on contracts. Developers get their kicks out of
Usage.
usage and like enjoying their platform. And so, they spent like a year and a half building this platform. We got to, I think by the end we were like 50K ARR, about 150 users, something like that, and like some good brand names and things like that. But also at the same time, a lot of those companies were my mates and like doing me a favor. So I'd say half of them were, let's call them real prospects and not my network friends, basically. That's another point. If there are any founders on a call, or like you're friends with people who are in startup, just buy their solution, just do them a favor, just bite the bullet and just pay them 12K if you can afford it.
Yeah. So this my superpower is translating. So I'll translate what I hear, some learnings, and tell me if I'm getting it right, Hector.
Sure.
I would say one, outsourced team members, the SDR that you hired that you probably brought in house. Maybe that was the right decision, maybe that wasn't. But where I go and what I do is bring in potentially an outsourced team that you can engage with, what I would say, in a finite time frame and tight maybe scope of work. And then I would say on the founder side of things, what you said, oh, I thought we just needed more meetings. Maybe it wasn't we needed more meetings. Maybe the messaging wasn't right, or maybe the product wasn't right. So that was one. The second I heard was the HubSpot integration, and I've heard this a lot from people. It's like 10 customers have said, if you build a HubSpot integration, we're going to buy it. So I would say, implore people to say, set up a pilot, set up a contract, set up an SOW, and say, and it's harder said than done, but if we were to build this, do I have a commitment from you that you're willing to spend this amount of money with me during this time, or you'll buy this many seats, whatever sort of the revenue model is. And then I hear founders are pulled in 7 billion directions. And Hector, I know me and you are also pulled in a million directions. So what's really helped me is I've developed a command station for my business. I've become a huge fan of Coda, and I've built sort of cards and processes for all of my bets, all of my strategies, client cards, internal cards. And I've gotten really organized as to what that looks like from a business. And I like to say you set up a measurement for success. So if we're going to test 3 to 5 marketing and sales experiments, what I call them, you need to say, what is the measurement of success? And don't move the goalpost until you actually run those experiments in a given time frame and see what the learning is or failure. And I don't believe in failures. And then just apply it in a different way. And then messaging, Hector, you hit on, is so important. It's like that game of telephone you used to play when it's a kid and you're sitting around the table and you go with your like elementary school class, and it's like, I started saying, I'll call you tomorrow, and it comes out like, we're playing basketball on Thursday. And you're like, what? That is not where the conversation started. And I've learned this the hard way. Messaging, what the client says and what you say have to be the same or very, very similar. And I've learned it from my own business. I realize we all sort of sometimes agree what the outcome is and what the deliverable is, but the way we speak about getting there and what we're doing for each other is sometimes different between the founders and the customer at the end of the day. So I think there's a lot of time that should get spent on that. And sometimes it feels fluffy to people, but I find it to be so important.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I'm very passionate about now. Is I rewatch pretty much all of our customer or client calls just to pick out keywords, and you can use them for ads, messaging on the website, everything else. And the second thing you touched on is organization. I've always thought it was quite unorganized people, but when you're running the show, it's a whole different echelon. Like if you speak to any CEO who's worth their salt, they will have an incredibly refined CEO operating system, and it's unique to each one, and it works for them, especially if they've got to a certain scale. But yeah, I didn't have that. Just be on it, like way more than you think you need to. You know, get your Notion, get your automation set up, get your reminders, get your task list that you like, make appropriate time for time blocking for certain stuff, and that's eventually how you'll start winning in that area. One thing that is also worth noting, because you reminded me of a harrowing memory. So
Sure,
when
go
you
for
when
it.
you when you said you're talking about being pulled in all these different directions, so now historically I would try and fix everything at once, because I was like, I've raised this money, I've all this
You feel
waiting
the
list of
weight of
me.
the world on your
Feel
shoulders.
feel the way of the world. I now believe, pick 3 things you're going to fix that week. Let the rest of the house burn to the ground. Just do those 3 things so much better than anyone else, and move the needle in those 3 places, and then fix the other stuff later. Like, maybe the landing page for the website's a little bit buggy. Can someone enter their email? Yes. let it
Good.
burn. Doesn't
Good
doesn't
enough.
matter. Yeah, good enough. You can't fix everything at once. You just don't have the resources or time to do so. One thing that we definitely also got really wrong is we tried to execute 3 different go-to-market motions at one time. So we tried to do direct sales, PLG. Installing PLG even from the ground up is an incredibly expensive, time-consuming, and difficult strategic initiative. It is a lot of flowcharts, a lot of different systems, a lot of data analysis. It is extremely challenging to get right. And then doing direct sales on top of that. And then also we tried channel partnerships and working with cold calling providers like Jiminy and Gong and Chorus. So if I had the runway and also the customer base, a lot of these companies would probably do it, but they have this: you have to work with at least 20 of our customers before we will consider reselling your solution. And my overall game plan was to build it to a certain scale, exit to Gong, and like just build it into part of their product where they can just add on like auto CRM updating as a solution. And it doesn't work like that. It takes like 6 to 12 months to, okay, maybe they'll say, yeah, we'll partner with you, and they gave us their API, but for their sales team to resell a product that's a pre-seed startup and barely any customers and it's a bit buggy, no chance. It was delusional at the time. And that was just the go-to-market side. I think that the other thing that I got catastrophically wrong was I think PR and LinkedIn specifically are the 2 most poisonous things to early stage founders. And a bit like you were saying earlier about competition and like they didn't do their research, right? I actually I did a lot of research, and I knew there was no one was doing anything that we were doing because no one thought it was possible. There are a couple of pieces of technology that came out on the machine learning side that meant what we were doing was initially possible. And so whilst that wasn't the case, there were 2 non-direct competitors, very famous ones, Dooley and Scratchpad, which a lot of people use to augment their workflows. And we ended up indirectly competing with them in deals. And I steered the ship to cloning the ability to do what they were doing and then adding our solution into it as a kind of all-in-one. That was a dumb move. And every fundraising round, this was also the time when Dooley was at the top of the market, and they raised a 20 million Series A, then a month later, like another 80 million Series B. Then Scratchpad responded by 25 million Series A, and then Series B 9 months later. And I see those messages, then I see it in TechCrunch, and I'm just thinking, God, this sucks. Like, we're so far behind. We're never going to beat these guys. We can move faster. We're more agile. We can build quicker. We can do all this, classic things. And I got distracted. And again, going back to this point about being the voice of communication to your co-founders, it's so easy to mislead them and lead them astray because they're relying on the conversations, and that I wasted time, money, and resource doing that. And what I should have done is just focus on one pain point, focus on one product and feature, listen to my customers, and just build it and do it better than anyone else. I truly believe if I hadn't have got distracted in that way and I just solely focused on this automatic CRM updating and make it really simple, probably would still be around.
I love that. I mean, this is so many nuggets. I'll say narrowly focused. I feel that too. I mean, we are both active on LinkedIn, and that's why we're doing LinkedIn Live. But the name of this show is Biz Therapy, and I feel like you're talking to the choir here of like all the things that you could have changed. But I will also say one thing you also mentioned was hire slow, fire fast. I hear that a lot with founders. Obviously it's harder when it's your friend or your mate, as you said, at the end of the day. But I just listened to a webinar and took a course on actually how to hire people, because I posted on LinkedIn, hey, I'm looking for like a Salesforce admin. Crickets, 0 responses, nothing. And I watched this webinar and it's like, what's the title? What's the job requirements? Even if it was a contractor or a fractional, to get really specific about what you're looking to do. And I think that goes into being really narrowly focused about the business. I think those are 2 lessons that sound great in theory, but harder to put into practice. But I think those are crucial pieces, because you do see people's PR and LinkedIn, and they're doing all this amazing stuff, but it's like apples and oranges. Like you're not the same, but in your head as the founder, like in the same row in G2.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's being an entrepreneur is kind of like sitting in the ocean, and you come up for a breath, and then a wave just hits you in the face, and then you spend 3 days underwater, and you come up from a breath, and then maybe 30 minutes up there, and you just get hit by another wave. And the level of, as we were saying at the start, the level of mental fortitude and grit and resilience that you required to be able to survive that first year. I mean, I did it. It was a slow and painful death. Like it was 3.5 years, and there were some, like very candidly, really difficult times. And I was, yeah, sometimes like I didn't like leave my bed for like 2 or 3 days on the weekend. Like when it came back to Monday, I would, put on a
Ramp it up.
ram it up and try and get back out there again. But in my personal life, it was awful. My co-founders made me take a week off, and they were like, "Go on holiday. Like you are totally useless at the moment," because we were just having such little success, and really struggling at all different avenues of the business. And I think the other thing that is really important to mention at this time as well is we tried to go and raise our seed round because we reached like close enough in revenue that we could have gone and raised the seeds, but then the market crashed at that time, or was crashing over that
Right.
period.
Economics out of your
Yeah,
control.
yeah. And so we went from this period of like, okay, yeah, like people were approaching us to fundraise because they thought it was a cool idea. People were buying lots of software. And then this goes into the whole, ethos of bloated tech stacks, cut everything that doesn't matter. You're now selling to the CFO. And so while it was pretty tough, we were surviving ish. And then it just got so hard. Which eventually led us into a position where we had to go and raise a bridge round. So we'd burned a bunch of capital. We raised another, let's say, like 350K after 18 months of doing this. And it also, bear in mind, again, the product was so technical, it took us 10 years to properly go to 10 years, 10 months to properly go to market. Like we had design partners and people helping us build it, but it wasn't actually ready for them to actually play with until that point. And then when that happens, final nail in the coffin comes out. Who could have seen OpenAI, ChatGPT come out
I was
the
gonna
corner?
ask, what would you have I was thinking that, what would you have changed if Claude, ChatGPT, Bard, all these things, like, would
So
that have helped you? Would that have hurt you? That was a good ask, but you brought it up, so let's
sure, no,
go
no.
for it.
So this is the large set of dominoes that happened, right? So, one is, again, we were having some commercial success. We were doing okay, but we didn't have enough money to survive. We didn't have enough money to, um, let's say, have the runway we needed to like fix all of the things that we knew that needed to be fixed. I'm sugarcoating a little bit, but again, if I hadn't got distracted by competitors and got obsessed with them, if I hadn't have hired people, not that necessarily because they were bad, but I just shouldn't have hired them at that time, I would have had that more runway. So that was just more of a executive strategy error. The problem with the OpenAI thing coming out is I was like, well, how good is this? Like I'm seeing articles about everywhere, and I copied and pasted a transcript into there was GPT-3 at the time, and I was just like, can you score this for medic, or like write the medic framework? And I thought, oh my god, this is it. We're so
Nail in
done.
the coffin.
And then I remember going on a demo and showing a rep what we did, and our system worked and it automated their fields and everything. And he was like, how much is it? And I was like, yeah, it's $79 a user a month. So if you've got 100 reps, it's like $7.5 grand a month, so on and so forth. And then he goes, oh, have you seen this chat GPT thing? And he did the thing that I'd done the week before. And I'm not going to cuss, but like inside I was swearing, and I that was it. I knew we were absolutely cooked. So then I went and spoke to my founders about it, and the problem was, so a large reason that many startups die is because of timing. So one is timing we got wrong in terms of if we'd gone the year before, we might have been okay, but we were too close to the OpenAI release that it just came into the market. Then the other thing that happens now, including our old investors, they'll like message me being like, oh yeah, these guys are doing what you were doing. And I was like, yeah, because they built it on top of a AI model. We built ours from, I was like, yeah, we built ours from scratch. Like,
Right.
you know how
Right.
much more expensive it is to do that. And then the other difficulty is there was one main competitor called Win.ai, which is an Israeli company. They raised $17 million for their seed round from Insight Partners. So tier one VC, huge sum of money, second time founder. And then even them, they've pivoted off the automatically updating. It's just a small feature for them. Now they do kind of like playbooks, and they had the money and maneuverability to do that. We had
To
one
pivot.
bet. Yeah, we had
Right.
one shot at making a product work, and we missed it. And the other thing that happened is now we had a conversation with my co-founders, and they basically were like, well, I guess we've got to pivot, right? So then we pivoted, started doing something else. I was having conversations with, it was an enterprise ready product, started having conversations with enterprise, and then we all just got burnt out. Like we'd been doing it for 2.5 years, 3 years. We tried even the new solution and direction that we were going. Someone else built it like and nailed it first time, and so they were like a year ahead of us. And all of the people that we were talking to at that time, so I think we were talking to like 8 enterprise companies, and they saw
Pivoted.
this company get released, and then we're like, we can't do this anymore. Like one of them had just had a baby, the other one, him and his wife wanted to get married and have a house and things. And this is the thing no one ever talks about, is like early day founder stress. Like I paid myself a salary of 25,000 pounds a year in London. My rent was 800, so I had like 800 pounds a month living. Doing that for nearly 3 years. There were times where I increased it, where I'm like, we've got to pay ourselves a bit more, but nothing substantial. Burnt, £40,000 worth of my savings. So what's that, like $55,000 roughly? And yeah, and I've got pretty much nothing to show for it apart from a lot of war wounds, a lot of scars. I was very lucky that most of my investors were nice enough to still talk to me. But yeah, some of them I really burnt the bridge with them, especially when I raised a second tranche of money from the same individuals to keep it alive, and I lost them 40% of that investment in 6 months. That's like the worst day on the stock market you can possibly have.
It's like a
Um,
2009 market.
yeah, it's atrociously bad, and I'd probably be irritated as well. Like, why would you not be? And then the other thing is, we got through half of that second tranche of capital, and I'm now trying to give it back, and it's taken me nearly a year. And like, why is it so hard just for me to be like, I don't want this money anymore. I just want to close down the company. The administration, the legal, talking to the government and getting it stricken off. It's still a burden to this day, and there are all these things that no one ever talks about that really suck. Like they really really hurt, and it took me after I closed it down, I cried for like I'd say like a week. I poured my heart, soul, money, everything I had into that, and I remember when I had the excitement of when I first thought of the idea and I was talking to investors. I remember when the investors said they were going to sign our term sheet, give us a term sheet, and like the elation there to where I ended up was just
Different
so
person.
different,
Different person of
different
Hector.
person. Yeah, yeah. And now thankfully, like because I've had that all experience, I've been able to learn from it and be in a position where I coach a lot of CEOs now, and
Yeah,
then
talk to us about what you're doing today. How
yeah,
about that there?
yeah. And so yeah, like I coach a lot of CEOs because of this experience, and I know exactly what it's like, and I'm also building my own new company up from all the lessons I learned previously. And one of the things that I'm very conscious of is someone's ability to remind themselves of the small wins. And so when someone says like, "Oh, this went really well today," the first thing I say is like, "Right, I want you to write that down and store it in a Notion page or wherever you want, and just call it good days or whatever you want, and have when you're in that period where you like get hit by a wave and you go back underwater, just try and remind yourself of the feeling when that customer sent you an email and said something like, that was an awesome demo. That was a really interesting tool, whatever that small win was, because if you can develop that self-reward system, that's going to pull you out and get you to perform 20-30% better.
That's what I was gonna ask. And self-care, I feel like, and I'm building like a scale-up agency at this point. I have on my desk these cards that I pull that basically tell me I'm awesome every day. I have this little thing someone gave me: in a world where you can be anything, be yourself. And I have in my draw a gratitude journal where every day I write down 3 things. I also try to exercise and get out of the office, but I also work with a therapist. I also work with a business coach. I also have what I consider like a personal board of directors. I don't have
Mm.
a formal advisory board because I have not raised funding at this point, but I have accountability buddies in different facets of the business that I can talk to. And so I wonder also, when you're coaching CEOs, did you tell them to put these mechanisms in place? Because a lot of it is mindset besides fortitude and grit to keep going.
Yeah, one of the things that I recommend they do is actually join a CEO group of other individuals and have a roundtable, because whilst your partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, friends, family,
They don't care as much as you do.
it's actually not that they don't care. I think it's they do care, but they just can't relate, and so they can't offer you actually helpful advice. Whereas like a CEO who has, I don't know, their email marketing automation broke and they accidentally pissed off 1,000 people by email. Someone else might have done that 6 months ago, and they'll be like, "Yeah, that was awful, but the way you dealt with it was X, Y, Z." Same thing with us. I remember one guy who I mentioned that one of our key customers was churning, and the guy was like, "Oh, that happened to me, and actually it was the best thing that ever happened, because the only reason they stayed with us is because we were building them bespoke solutions. Don't worry about it, ignore them." And it was the same scenario. They asked us to build something crazy and pay us like a little bit more, but not the amount of effort, because it'd be such a bespoke solution. And I think, yeah, having that support network, so your mental, then your grit, determination. The other thing I often find myself coaching early fashion CEOs, literally just focus. And when I mentioned earlier about like having one product focus, it's the same thing with this goals in a week. They always come to me and say, "Hey, like this is happening, this is happening, this is happening." I said, "Okay, but what are you going to get done this week or month?" And they're mentioning 50 things. I said, "No, you're not. You're gonna write all of those down, and then you're gonna cross out 10 of them." And they're like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah, if you're gonna do all those 10 things, you're gonna do them all uh, half as well as you could do. Just
Poorly.
pick two and do them as well as you can." Yeah, exactly.
I love that. I love that. And I feel like there's so much that goes into it. And I do feel like you need a village at the end of the day. Like there's so much that goes
Mm,
on behind the scenes, even though if you were maybe the face and you were dealing with the customers, you had like a village of people working around you at the end of the day. So talk to us about sort of, you have all these lessons. I think you've shared so many that people should learn from, but talk to us about what you're up to today, where you are, what you're doing.
yeah, sure. So I am currently building a business influencer marketplace. So we connect brands with business influencers. So get them to post on LinkedIn for you, sponsor webinars, ad spots in newsletters. And I'm aiming to achieve 2 different things. So one is increasing brand awareness, and like if you're going to market, you're launching a new SaaS product, whatever else, you can make a splash very quickly and elevate your brand. And then on the other side, adding a lot of LinkedIn or business influencers and creators like yourself, Stacey, invest hours creating collateral, like writing
I
posts, building
do,
an audience.
Hector.
No one ever pays you for it. You're like releasing so much good content unless you go through and make a course. But you have this devout following, and so the whole aim of it is, yeah, just connecting brands and these business influencers together, and it's going so much better. And a lot of that is because of the lessons that I've been able to learn from my previous mistakes. And I think the ones that have really helped me succeed is, one is I now talk to customers and like either influencers or brands, even if they're not users of my solution or they're not even particularly interested. If they will talk to me for 15 minutes, I will take that call and just keep an open dialogue with all of them as much as I can, so I don't make the same mistake of just building what I think in my head is right based off of like, okay, some interviews, but yeah, now I'm very
You
in
got
it.
to hear it from the horse's mouth, I always
Yeah,
say in sales.
exactly. Then I think the other thing that I really learned was just like bit by bit, just don't try and build everything at once. We're doing one block at a time. It's working. And then I think the final piece that's also been really important is, before I wrote a line of code, I just no coded everything and like shackled it all together with duct tape, and it's pretty it's almost a platform, but it's still a lot of duct tape and Zapier and things like that. And I still don't really want to, go all in on a product until I am damn sure that it's worth investing in, and that's also to make it profitable, right? Like developers are expensive, no code tools, probably spend $200 a month to get everything to work. So why build invest 60K getting a MVP made when you can achieve the same results for $200? That's rule one is make money.
I love that. I love that. If there's any sort of call to action or any way for people to get in touch with you, you mentioned maybe having founder conversations with folks that can connect on the Fluencer platform. Anything else that you want to share people should do if they want to find you?
Yeah, sure. Just connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm usually pretty responsive on there. Otherwise, if you are either a brand who wants to do business influencer marketing, feel free to sign up. Likewise, if you're a business influencer who wants to earn some money from writing content or creating content, also, yeah, see you there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your honesty. I have some good comments. I'll just shout them out towards the end. We have our friend Amir who said some hard truths being shared. We have this one we're saying hiring is tricky, especially for startups. And we all know that's not it. And then we have so appreciate your honesty, Hector. This happens a lot, but not many people talk about it. And that's really the reason why I asked Hector to come on for our March installment, because everyone hears about the amazing success and the get rich part of it, but it is such a grind to get there. And you basically said 0% make it to exiting and get the money that they're looking for. So it's tough, but it's possible. And I think sharing your story with a wider audience, not just in your personal network, but more of an audience that maybe knows about you or doesn't know about Hector, I think that these lessons can be applied to anyone at the end of the day, and it's so important.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Stacey. And yeah, now I guess you consider this my own therapy session, getting off my
It
chest.
is. Biz
Yeah,
Therapy is the name of the series. And
yeah,
I honestly started this about 5 months ago because I have all these amazing conversations behind closed doors on Zoom at the end of the day. And people like yourself have been so open and honest and transparent with me that the brave ones that are willing to come on the show and talk about it to people that are sort of in our orbit, I think that is the mission of why I'm doing this at the end of the day.
awesome. Well, yeah, thanks so much. And hopefully, the next time you interview me, it will be when I'm celebrating Fluence's success.
Can't wait. I knew you when. You heard it here first.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hector. Appreciate it.
Cheers. Goodbye.